The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am bringing you another installment of In the Know, my series of videos for players who are new to the Arkham Horror LCG. In this video, we are going to discuss the list of taboos. Fantasy Flight Games updated the list on Thursday, and players have been asking a lot of questions on various forums about the list and what it means for the Arkham Horror LCG. The list of taboos has been a controversial topic since it was announced in April 2019, and I hope that by the end of this video you'll have a better understanding of it so that you can decide for yourself whether or not you want to use it in your games. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. Special thanks to Blair Lafferty, the latest patron to embrace the darkness. Thank you very much, Blair. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you'd like to support the channel and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Without further ado, let's get started. This video is going to talk about, it's going to answer 4 key questions about the list of taboos. That is, what is the list of taboos? What is the objective of the list? How does the list affect you as a new player of the Arkham Horror LCG? And which cards have been added to the list and why? The first question is, what is the list of taboos? Well, the list of taboos is a list of cards with optional deck building restrictions or text changes. The key word here being optional. The entire list of taboos is completely optional, so you may use it or not as you see fit. Now, if an investigator chooses to adhere to the restrictions on the list, they must choose to do so in full. They cannot pick and choose which restrictions to use. Now, this is something the designers have put forward, but in practice, I think there are quite a few players who ignore this rule and pick and choose the cards they want to use as they see fit. And certainly, you are free to do so. If there are certain cards that you like and you want to play with, by all means, play with them. There are 3 lists of cards. There are chained and unchained cards, there are mutated cards, and there are forbidden cards. And we will take a look at each of those in the following slides. The first group of cards are the chained and unchained cards. These cards on this list have their experience cost increased or decreased, as you know, in the Arkham Horror LCG. There are level 0 cards, which you start with in your deck at the beginning of the campaign, and then as you earn experience points during the campaign, you can upgrade these cards or purchase new cards. Some of these level 0 cards have had additional experience points added to them, so you can no longer include them in your deck at the start of a campaign, but you are free to purchase them as you play. Now, one important thing to remember about these cards is that each card's level remains the same, only the experience spent to purchase this card is changed. Let me give you a couple of examples. Roland Banks is the Guardian Investigator from the core set. He can use Guardian cards level 0 to 5 and Seeker cards level 0 to 2. Now, Pathfinder is a level 1 card, so Roland Banks may use it. And in Thursday's update, Pathfinder had its experience cost raised by 2. So it now costs 3 experience points to include Pathfinder in your deck. Now, some players may think that this precludes Roland from including Pathfinder in his deck since it now costs 3 experience points. But that's not the case. Pathfinder is still a level 1 card. It simply costs 3 experience points if you want to add it to your deck. So it does still fall within Roland's deck building restrictions. So Roland is free to use it. You have a similar case if you, say, are playing an investigator like Akachi and you want to play the card Versatile or purchase the card Versatile, which allows you to spend 2 experience points to add any level 0 card to your deck. Now, Versatile costs you 2 experience points, and Forbidden Knowledge is a level 0 card. However, in the recent update to the list of taboos, Knowledge's power had its experience point cost raised by 2. So Technically, Akachi wouldn't be able to add this card to her deck if it was a level 2 card, but because it is a level 0 card that costs 2 experience points, Akachi could purchase a copy of Versatile and then spend 2 experience points to add a copy of Knowledge's Power to her deck as that level 0 card if she wished. So the important thing to remember here is that while the card costs more experience points, it remains the level that it was before the change. Now, the other thing about the Unchained and Chained cards is that the experience adjustment should be taken into account when upgrading to or from a card on this list. Now, an example of this is Higher Education. Higher Education 0 was released in the Harvey Walters starter deck. Higher Education 3 was released in the Blood on the Altar Mythos pack way back in the Dunwich Legacy. Now, Higher Education 3 is chained. It has its experience point cost raised by 3. So if you want to upgrade from Higher Education 0 to Higher Education 3, you need to spend 6 experience points. 3 for the cost on the card plus 3 for the chained. Now, there are some pros and cons to chaining, unchaining, and unchaining cards. One of the pros is that once the card is in your deck, it functions as printed. The only thing you have to remember or figure out is when you are purchasing or upgrading the card between scenarios. One of the cons to this, however, is that if the experience point cost is increased too little or it is increased too much, the change may be ineffective and players will continue to play the overpowered card, or it may result in a soft ban of the card where the card is simply overpriced. It costs too many experience points and players simply won't purchase that card. And if they won't purchase that card, you are essentially banning it because nobody will play it. The second list of cards are the mutated cards. Cards on this list have additional or altered game text. Some of these changes include adding a limit to how many times you may use the card per round or per phase. It may also include adding keywords such as exceptional, which was added here to the Key of Ys. Back in the Path to Carcosa, Key of Ys was considered too powerful, so they added exceptional to it, so there could only be one copy on the table at a time. Now, the pros of mutating a card is that it can alter the power level of the card and bring it back into line with similar effects. And it can change the power of the card, unlike chaining, which does not change the power of the card at all. It simply makes it cost more experience to purchase. Mutating can change the power level, rein it in a little bit, and bring it into line. One of the cons of this, of course, is that when you start changing card text, it can be difficult to remember, it can be cumbersome, and it can clutter the card's text box because Fantasy Flight Games has been kind enough to provide a downloadable PDF with images of all the cards that are on the list of taboos with updated game text. So if they were to say change a card and mutate it and add a whole bunch of text, it might look the text box would become too cluttered and it would become difficult to read. And if you didn't happen to have that downloadable PDF handy, it might be difficult to remember what the card actually does. So the designers have tried their best to eliminate all that and make, if they do mutate a card, they try to limit the mutation to making a few subtle changes and avoid radical changes. Finally, we have the forbidden cards, which is exactly what it sounds like. These are cards that cannot be included in your deck at all. There is only one forbidden card in the game, that being Double or Nothing from the Dunwich Legacy. Now, banning cards has the advantage of opening up some deck space, design space for the designers of the game. There are cards that can make it extremely difficult for the designers to create new cards Double or Nothing being one of the primary offenders of this, because it does double the effects of all skill tests, which can be very difficult to design around. Obviously, the downside of banning cards is that nobody really likes to be told what cards they can and cannot play with, especially when you've paid hard-earned money for them. So there is only one forbidden card on the list, and as I mentioned at the top of this episode, the list is completely optional. So if you enjoy playing with Double or Nothing, have at it. So what is the objective of the list of taboos? According to the designers, the goal of the list is to craft a healthy balance between the investigator power and scenario difficulty. This is usually done by reining in powerful cards that either dominate a slot or archetype and push other cards out as viable options. We have seen this over the game's history, where there are certain allies or assets or events that are just so good that they are played far more than others in that same slot, to the point where the designers have stepped in and used the list of taboos to suggest to players that, hey, there are other cards that can go in this slot. Why don't you give those a try and explore some new strategies? So they can rein in the powerful cards. Now, many of these cards that you will see on the list are cards that that the designers attempted to rein in with some sort of drawback. Unfortunately, that drawback on the card wasn't powerful enough to dissuade players from using it or abusing it, and in some cases that drawback actually turned into a benefit. So players were able to either work around it or turn it to their advantage, at which point the card simply became too powerful for the game. So how does the list affect you as a new player? Well, as I mentioned at the top of this episode, the list of taboos is completely optional, and whether you use it or not is entirely up to you. Personally, if you're playing solo, I would recommend that you simply ignore the list of taboos to begin with. Play the cards once you have a better grasp of the cards and some of the mechanics of the game, and you are looking for a bit of a challenge further down the road, then perhaps you can revisit the list of taboos and see what it has to offer you. But starting out, I wouldn't worry about the list of taboos too much. Now, if you're playing in a group setting, as I mentioned, some of the groups have house rules regarding playing certain investigators or playing certain cards or combination of cards. Your best option here is to simply ask what the group is playing. Some groups play with the list of taboos, others do not. Others play with their own house rules. And so if you're going to be playing in a group, say if you're preparing for an event at Arkham Knights, it's often a good idea just to ask people what their preference is. Now, personally, I don't feel strongly about the list of taboos either way. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. And I think that has a lot to do with the type of player that I am. I'm not the type of player who really tries to break the game. I enjoy powerful cards, of course, but I'm not the type of player who is constantly pushing boundaries and trying to create situations where I've broken the game or created infinite loops or anything like that. So I tend not to play with a lot of the cards that are problematic in the first place. I am also the type of player that sort of prefers to try to beat scenarios with decks that use as little experience as possible. I'm very reluctant to add a ton of experience points to my deck if I'm playing standalone. The main reason being I really hate weaknesses, and so I tend not to add a ton of experience points to my deck, and so I tend not to use a lot of these combinations. And some of the combinations require you to play very experience point intensive decks, 30, 40, 50 points worth of experience points to get the sort of effects that will break the game, and that's just not really what I'm interested in. So sometimes I play with the with cards on the list, sometimes I don't, If I'm going to an event where people are using the taboo list, I tend to use it. But in my personal games, if I'm testing a certain investigator, sometimes I will use cards just from an efficiency standpoint because honestly, this game can be hard enough, and there's no need to tie your hands behind your back and not use certain cards just because they're on the taboo list. I think you should leverage every advantage that you can get, and ignoring the taboo list is one way to do that. So which cards are on the taboo list? Well, the list was introduced in April of 2019, and it has evolved from that time. Cards have mostly gone on the list. I think they might have removed one or two, but you can find the full list of cards on page 15 of the FAQ 1.8 on the FFG website. Now, the designers added a lot of cards to the list of taboos on Thursday, so we're going to take a look at those cards. I'm not going to go through all the cards on the list. Some of them have been on the list from the beginning. And I'm just going to take a quick look at some of the new cards and give you an explanation why some of those cards were added or changed. The first card on the list is Machete. It is from the core set. It is they added +1 experience to it, down from +2 initially. Now, the reason they added +2 experience to this card when it was added to the taboo list, because it was one of the best level 0 weapons in the game, and it really hampered the designer's ability to design other weapons like survival knife and whatnot. Most players would simply compare them to Machete and say, like, well, why would I play this when I can simply play Machete, which is much better? So when they added +2 experience to it, Machete basically fell out of play because, especially for Guardian investigators, because spending two experience points to gain Machete was sort of a waste of their time when they could spend, say, 5 and get something like a lightning gun or a flamethrower. Upgrading to or purchasing the Machete simply wasn't worth their time. Now, there are some investigators who might be interested in Machete, but for the most part, a dedicated Guardian, they simply weren't interested. And this sort of resulted in the soft ban that I mentioned earlier. They raised the experience point cost too high, and players simply thought it's not worth it at 2 experience points, so we'll just not play it. And so the card fell out of use. Now they've lowered the experience point cost to 1. That's for most experience, or for most dedicated Guardians, I highly doubt they're going to purchase this card still at that. There might be some investigators who will be interested in it. This is one of the cards I don't really have a problem with as a player. I think playing solo as I do, that the Machete is pretty balanced, because if you are attacked by multiple enemies, you do not get the damage bonus. And I have found myself in many a situation where I have been armed with a Machete and I have run into 2 enemies. And once that happens, the Machete is not a particularly good weapon. So while it is quite efficient if you are dealing with enemies one-on-one, once you get swarmed, it can be a real problem. So I've always felt that while Machete was one of the best weapons in the game, they have released other weapons such as the Enchanted Blade that are pretty good as well. And so I don't really have a problem playing this one even at 0 experience points. But on the taboo list, it is worth +1 if you want to add it to your deck. The second bunch of cards are there were 5 permanent assets released in the Blood of the Altar Mythos pack. 3 of them, Higher Education, Streetwise, and Scrapper, were far too powerful compared to the other 2, and they were far too powerful compared to many other assets in the game. So initially, the designers tacked these on with a plus 5 experience points for higher education and streetwise, and plus 2 for scrapper. Now, they have lowered that experience point cost down to 3 for higher education and streetwise, and down to 1 for scrapper. So if you want to purchase higher education, it is going to, or streetwise, it is going to cost you 6 experience points now, and scrapper will cost you 2. Now, there were many players who were very happy to purchase higher education and streetwise at 8 experience points. And so I'm sure there will be many who will be thrilled to be paying only 6 for them. Higher education and streetwise are still incredibly powerful and are great additions to a rogue deck. And so if you are using the list of taboos, they are often, many investigators will pick these up, and they'd be quite happy to pay the extra experience points for them. So the designers lowered the experience point price a little bit, perhaps to throw a bone to the Seekers and Rogue players, because the Seekers and Rogues get hit fairly hard with this in the list of taboos. So perhaps giving them back higher education and streetwise is a bit of a compromise in that respect. But they are still extremely powerful cards at whether you're paying 6 or 8 experience points for them. One of the other cards added to the list is Pathfinder. It is a Seeker asset that lets you move for free as long as you're not engaged with an enemy. I got to admit, this one hurts. Pathfinder is one of my favorite cards in the Seeker card pool, and I purchase it in just about every investigator that can take it. It is now, they added 2 experience to it, so it now costs 3 experience to add to your deck. But the power of this card is really undisputed. It offers a free movement that doesn't require any slots, so you can have 2 of these things on the table and move twice per turn for free as long as you are not engaged with an enemy, which can make it well worthwhile, especially if you are trying to be quick and beat the encounter deck before it has a chance to set up. The other big problem with Pathfinder is it basically made the designer's life very difficult, because they had a lot of trouble designing other cards like Esoteric Atlas that involved some sort of movement, and trying to design something that was as good as Pathfinder was sort of doomed to fail. And so cards like Esoteric Atlas arrived on the scene, and people looked at it and said, why do I want to play that? I can play Pathfinder instead. And so Esoteric Atlas didn't see a lot of play. Perhaps that will change now that Pathfinder is worth 2 extra experience points. I would still gladly pay 3 for it, but this will rein it in a little bit, and perhaps players will look at some of the other movement related cards in the game. Flamethrower was also added to the list. It is now worth 1 experience point more, so instead of 5 experience points, you need to play 6 for it. Flamethrower is easily one of the best level 5 weapons in the game, and it can do a ridiculous amount of damage to an enemy, especially if you combine. So it's easy to understand why this one ended up on the list. It makes cards like Lightning Gun, the M1918 bar, and Shotgun less appealing to Guardian players when they could pick this up for 5 experience points. Now it costs 6, and I think that a lot of Guardian players will still pick this up. I wouldn't be surprised if the designers either up the experience point cost on this one in a future update, or possibly mutate it to rein in its power a little bit. This thing can do an extreme amount of damage. I remember sitting at a table with patron of the channel, Robert Bout, who was using the Flamethrower and absolutely devastating the blob. Doing, I think he hit it for 14 points of damage in a turn. So once this thing gets going, it can get extremely nasty. We come to Mr. Rook, probably, I think, the card that people have been expecting to be added to the list of taboos for a long time. Mr. Rook has been added at a hefty +4 experience points, and that is not surprising because his free ability to exhaust and search the top 3, 6, 9, or 9 cards of your deck enables a lot of combos. He really outclasses a lot of other Seeker allies, much like Dr. Mylan Christopher before him. And he's got this amazing ability, and he has 2 health and 2 sanity, which makes him great at soaking horror and damage. Now, Mr. Rook is a good example of a card where the designers attempted to balance him by adding a drawback. That is, if you find a weakness among the searched cards, you have to draw one of them. Unfortunately, that drawback is simply not strong enough to rein in Mr. Rook's ability, and many players felt that was actually an advantage, because if you can use Mr. Rook to find your weakness, you can get it out of your way, so you don't have to deal with it anymore, and then you can just search and draw with reckless abandon. So hopefully by reining in Mr. Rook, that will tap down the Seeker decks a little bit. Seekers have, there's been a general consensus among many players that Seekers are overpowered, and Mr. Rook is often blamed for being one of the key components of that. If you were playing a Seeker or an Investigator who could take Seeker cards, you were probably playing Mr. Rook just because his ability is so good. If you want that privilege now and you're using the list of taboos, then you can pay 4 experience points for him. So purchasing 2 copies of Mr. Rook, that will set you back 8 experience points. Now, I found the announcement by FFG interesting because they also hinted that Mr. Rook is a likely candidate for mutation. They really hedged their, I think they hedged their bets a little bit here, because while they said that they are hoping that adding 4 experience points will rein in Mr. Rook, they also admitted that it's probably not going to. Players will be more than happy to play 4 experience points for him anyway, so he may need a mutation in the future to rein him in even more. So if the designers are admitting that the +4 experience points might not be enough, it's probably not enough, and I would expect that Mr. Rook to get nerfed further in the future. Knowledge is Power is another one that kind of hurts. I really like this card. It is a very powerful card, and it has been added 2 experience points to it, so it's now costs you 2 experience points if you want to add it. This card is just, I mean, it's very powerful. It's free, it's fast, it's basically an additional action, and as its flavor text suggests, it has the ability to corrupt tomes and spell assets. Especially once they become more powerful, like the Necronomicon that was released in the Harvey Walter starter deck. The Necronomicon was already nuts, but you add Knowledge is Power to the mix, and you can trigger the Necronomicon twice without spending any of its secrets, and you can trigger it from your hand. It's just, it gets ridiculous pretty quickly. So I'm not all that surprised to see this one on the list of taboos. They have attempted to try to rein it in a little bit while making it still accessible to players. I think a lot of players will still purchase this for 2 experience points. It's just that good, especially if you're playing any tome or spell assets at all. This is the one card I reached for in an Akachi deck I built with Versatile. Just because Akachi is all about spells, and so having 2 extra actions where you're not spending charges is amazing. So not much of a surprise here. As the designers admitted, the Seekers get hit pretty hard in this update. Segment of Onyx was also added. Now, it is coming in at +3 experience points. It is myriad, so you can add 3 copies to your deck for a total of 4 experience points. Now, as they admit, the problem is not the segment itself. It is the Pendant of the Queen, which you grab once you assemble the segments. You need all 3 segments in play, and then you can search your bonded cards for the Pendant of the Queen. The problem with the segments is that they work extremely well in decks that can quickly cycle through themselves. So what ends up happening is if a deck can cycle itself quickly, it finds the 3 segments very rapidly, gets them on the table, brings out the Pendant of the Queen. It uses the Pendant of the Queen very quickly because it has 3 charges. So they use all those 3 charges to use the Pendant of the Queen, and then before they know it, they have cycled through their deck, they've assembled the segments again, and back comes the Pendant of the Queen. So they get to use this very powerful card over and over and over again. Mr. Rook is part of this as well, that he can rapidly he can find the segments for you. Mandy can play a role in this, and she gets to resolve her search ability twice, so that just makes finding the segments that much quicker. This is another card that the designers seem to admit that the +3 experience point price on this will not be enough to rein it in, and that it is a likely candidate for mutation in the future. I think that I think it's wishful thinking on the designer's part to hope that players will rein themselves in, because I think players will be more than happy to continue to pay 4 experience points for this and continue to abuse the Pendant of the Queen. So a likely candidate for mutation here. Of course, the final Seeker card that we see is the Necronomicon from the Harvey Walter starter deck. This thing was bad news from the moment that it was released. It has 5 intellect skill icons. It uses 6 secrets. It does all sorts of powerful things, and it only gets crazier when you combine it with other cards. It is now worth +3 experience points, so you are going to have to spend 8 if you want a copy of this. The Necronomicon was already powerful in its own right, but when you combine it with cards like Knowledge is Power, which lets you trigger it from your hand or the table for free, or Sleight of Hand, which lets you play the Necronomicon, use all of its 6 secrets, then return it to your hand, and then play it again, and then use all 6 secrets, it just got really silly. So they have attempted to rein in the power of the Necronomicon by first adding a bunch of experience points to it, so it will cost you 8. And they've also added experience points to Knowledge is Power, as we saw earlier. And they have also made changes to Sleight of Hand to try to break up that combination. So you cannot abuse the Necronomicon as much as you did in the past. Now, will this stop players? I have my doubts, simply because Knowledge is Power. While it costs an extra 2 experience points, that will not stop players from purchasing it. So it is quite easy to play the Necronomicon in combination with Knowledge is Power and get those 2 free activations. And then if you are able to cycle your deck quickly, you can get multiple activations per game, and you end up with the same problem as you had before. So I would not be surprised if they either make more changes to this card or Knowledge is Power to try to rein it in a little bit. There are several cards that were mutated as well. One of them is Quick Thinking. Now, Quick Thinking had been on the list of taboos before. They had limited it to prevent you from committing more than 1 to a skill test, to avoid you racking up a lot of additional actions each turn. They have now limited the ability to once per round. So the most free actions you can get from a quick thinking is once per round. Amanda Sharp is really single-handedly responsible for this one, for the change to this card, because if you can place this under Amanda, and she is able to she gets to commit this to all of her skill tests during a turn, you could end up with the specter of an infinite, of a deck going infinite and just being able to string along action after action after action. Quick thinking was also a central part of infinite recursion decks that used double or nothing and the rogue card all in to go infinite, and so by limiting it to once per round, that will help rein those decks in. But I think Amanda here is the key reason that this one ended up on the list. Sleight of Hand has also been mutated. Sleight of Hand was already on the list of taboos. Initially, they mutated it so that you couldn't use it with two-handed weapons. What players were doing was using it in combination with cards like the shotgun or the Chicago typewriter to play them on the table, fire off all of their ammunition, and then bring it back to their hand so they could rinse and repeat the following turn. It was also extremely powerful. While that limited the two-handed weapons, you could still use it with cards like the Necronomicon to drop that into play, spend all of its secrets, then bring it back to your hand, and then play it a following turn and use all its secrets. So you were getting a lot of value for those cards with Sleight of Hand. They have changed it, so now it is limited to level 0 to 3 item assets, so you cannot use it with the Necronomicon anymore. But this does mean that you can use it with some two-handed weapons again, which is a nice change if that's what you're interested in doing. So now you can, as long as the weapon is level 3 or lower, you can still use it with Sleight of Hand to drop it down, fire off some shots, bring it back to your hand, and then play it with using resources the following turn. Now, one of the downsides of limiting it to level 0 to 3 item assets is that it cannot be used with signature weapons like Tony's 38 Long Colt, because signature weapons do not have a level. So investigators like Tony Morgan cannot use Sleight of Hand with their signature assets. Say if on the off chance Roland Banks wanted to purchase Versatile so he could play Sleight of Hand, he couldn't use it with his signature weapon either. So that is, I guess maybe that will change in the future, but for the time being, you are limited to using this on items level 0 to 3 and no signature weapons. All In was another rogue card that was added to the list of taboos. It was mutated to add remove from game to the game text. The big problem with this card is that it allowed an investigator to draw a massive amount of cards, which when you played it in an infinite recursion deck like this one here featuring Safina Rousseau, if you combined it with double or nothing and quick thinking, you could end up doubling the draw off of All In and doubling the actions off of quick thinking, and you could end up with another infinite recursion deck. So the designers felt one of the easiest ways to limit that would be to remove All In from the game once it's played. So you can still use the card, but you get to only use it twice per game. And as we've seen, they've also broken up this infinite recursion by changing the text on quick thinking and banning double or nothing. So we'll see if that puts an end to the infinite recursion decks that some people were playing. The designers don't always take things away. They sometimes throw the players a bone and give them something to chew on. That being, there are two cards. One being all three versions of Scroll of Secrets. They have changed the action. The regular versions all cost an action. That action has been changed to a free triggered ability. The problem with this card was that it simply wasn't worth the action. Triggering it wasn't worth the action unless you were playing an investigator like Daisy Walker, who gets a free action every turn to trigger a tome. So this card really wasn't seeing very much play. By changing that action to a free triggered ability, the card is likely to see a lot more play in the future, especially with the release of Gloria Goldberg, the new Mystic Investigator, who will be released in the upcoming Dark Revelation novella next month. This sort of card is right up Gloria's alley, so I see this as sort of a peremptory change just to make Gloria's deck a little bit better, and other investigators might be interested in exploring what this card can do as well. The other card that got a bit of a bump was the 35 Winchester. This card was simply not very good upon release. It did have sort of corner case situations where you could play it, but compared to a lot of other Guardian weapons, it simply was not worth your time and effort because triggering the extra damage is huge. It is so important to a Guardian that it needs to be reliable, and the damage from the 35 Winchester was simply unreliable because it depended on the token you pulled, and that token had to be a +1 or 0 or Elder Sign. So the designers have changed that now. It now triggers on non-negative tokens, so that works better with an investigator like Jim Culver, who treats skulls as zeros. So if you're playing if Jim picks up the Winchester and draws a skull, he will get the +1/+2 damage. So if you're playing a campaign like the Path to Carcosa, which has 3 skulls in the bag to start with, Jim's odds of triggering the damage are far greater. It will also now work with blessed tokens that were introduced in the Innsmouth Conspiracy. So if you were playing a Guardian, say, like Tommy, who can add a lot of blessed tokens to the bag, if he is armed with the Winchester and he pulls one of those blessed tokens, he has a much greater chance of dealing additional damage with this thing. So it makes it slightly better. I'm still not convinced that it's going to see a ton of play, but it's nice to see that much like the Springfield before it, the designers are trying to make some of the cards that aren't exactly superstars a little more enticing to players in this game, so they don't sit in the binder. Finally, there is only one forbidden card, that being the infamous Double or Nothing. This card has been a problem since the beginning of the game. It is very difficult for the designers to balance around it because it doubles the results of tests, which can lead to some absolutely crazy situations that can swing a game in a huge way. If you thought Flamethrower was bad before, throw a Double or Nothing into the mix and suddenly you are dishing out horrendous amounts of damage. I played this card during Arkham Knights a couple years ago in combination with Daisy. She was playing Archaic Glyphs Guiding Stones to gather multiple clues, and if I threw a Double or Nothing in on that test, we could clear an 8 clues off a location in one action, which is absolutely bonkers powerful. So they attempted to rein in this card by tacking on an experience point cost to it. That was not enough because players were more than happy to simply pay that experience points for this card because the effect is simply incredibly powerful. Like it basically will win you a game if you play this properly. And while it does have a downside, that is, it doubles the difficulty of the skill test, that is simply not enough. Players they can jack up their base skill value so high that doubling the skill test is not even close to enough to stopping them from triggering this. So it was very hard to balance, very swingy. You can play it to do simple things like, hey, I investigate, I grab 2 clues instead of 1, but nobody was really playing it for that. They were really playing this in the most abusive situations possible. And as we've seen, it was also a central component of the infinite recursion decks that were being built out of Rogue. So by adding this to the Forbidden list, that takes it out of contention for those decks. There are plenty of other cards that could end up on the list at some point. Just doing a quick look through the various forms for this game, and you can come up with quite a list of cards. Many of them Seeker cards, because Seekers are still considered to be overpowered, but you have things like Astonishing Revelation, Crack the Case, the Ancient Stone Knowledge of the Elders. Dream Enhancing Serum is incredibly powerful. Eucatastrophe out of Survivor can be extremely powerful if you combine it with William Yorick. You've got Cryptic Research, the Dream Diary, the Archaic Stone, Archaic Glyphs Guiding Stones, all Seeker cards. The Seekers really, the draw is the big thing there that they may need to rein in. You've got investigators like Wendy Adams, who can be combined with cards like Premonition to end up with infinite decks. Mandy Thompson was also among one of the top contenders to end up on the list of taboos. She did not this time, but perhaps she will at some point in the future. Players have also talked about making Telescopic Sight a little more playable. It's not particularly good right now, but with a few changes. And I've even seen more recent cards like Summon Hound talked about as needing fixing. So all in all, I'm happy with the list of taboos. I think the designers hit a lot of the cards that needed to be hit. Mr. Rook being the most obvious example. The Seekers had access to a lot of powerful cards, and they have one of the most powerful access to one of the most powerful abilities in the game, that being access to plenty of cards that draw cards. So that combination can be extremely lethal in this game. So the designers attempted to tap down that. Again, I tend not to play a lot of these high-powered decks to begin with, so I'm not too sure how much the list will affect me going forward. Cards like Pathfinder and Knowledge is Power kind of hurt, because I like those cards, but I can certainly understand why they are on the list. If you're a new player who is interested in learning more about the list of taboos, you can find a complete list of the cards on page 15 of FAQ 1.8, and you can decide for yourself whether you want to use it or not. Personally, I would recommend that you don't at the beginning, and then once you get a little more comfortable with the game, it's something you might be interested in exploring once you want a better challenge. But until then, it's something that is completely optional. Play the game the way you want to play it. It's your game after all. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I am also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.